We're going to go ahead and take a look at factoring. First of all, we're going to start by reviewing some of the specials. Top one is differences of squares. Differences of squares factors into two parentheses that are the same, except one has a plus and one has a minus. Then the next one down is differences of cubes. Differences of cubes factors into two parentheses where there's two terms in the first one and two or three terms in the second one. Factors into this form. Now, sum of cubes is very similar to the one up here in green for differences of cubes, except the first two signs are switched. Notice the first sign right here always matches with what you were starting out with. The differences of cubes has a difference to begin with. The sum of cubes has a sum here to begin with. The second sign here is always opposite the first one. The last sign is always positive. When we are factoring, you want to start out always by looking for your greatest common factor. If there's only two terms, then you want to check to see if it's a special. And those specials are the three that we just talked about up here. Differences of cubes, sum of cubes, and differences of cubes. If there's only three terms, then you want to try the AC factoring. So A is the number in front of your squared, C is the number that doesn't have any variables by it. You multiply them together, and then you find factors of that number that you get that add up to B, where B is the middle term. And we'll walk through that here in a bit. If there's four terms, you want to factor by grouping. So we're going to start out here by taking out our greatest common factor. That's always the first thing you look for. Sometimes there is one, sometimes there isn't. In this case, we have two terms, what's before and after the subtraction sign. You notice the numbers in front, we could pull out a 2. You also know with what's before and after the subtraction sign, they both have a u. So we could pull out a 2u. Then you got to think, okay, 2u times what gives me 4u squared? That's another 2u. Still have that subtraction sign. Then you got to think, okay, 2u times what is a 2uv? That's just a v. Sometimes after you pull out your greatest common factor, you can factor farther yet. But in this case, that's it. That's all we can do. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at the next. We want to go ahead and take a look for that greatest common factor. In this case, there is nothing that goes into all three terms. But there are three terms, so we're going to use that AC factoring. A is the number in front of your squared. C is the number that's off by itself. We multiply those together and we get negative 56. So now we need to start looking at the factors of negative 56. So we could have a negative 1 and a positive 56, negative 2 and positive 28, and we want to keep listing them until we find a pair of factors that add up together to give us this positive 10. So we'll keep doing that, going all the way through. And you could list them all if you wanted, but if you come across the one that's going to work for you, because when you add these together, the negative 4 and the 14, you could actually stop at that point. So the highlighted orange ones are the ones we're going to use. So we'll go the 7x plus our 14x. So the positive 14 comes from this. Now we're also going to have a negative 4x. And by the way, 14x and negative 4x does add together to give us the 10x that we started out with. Then we still have to have that negative 8 hanging out at the end. So now we need to look at the highlighted blue. What can we take out of the blue? Well, they both have a 7, they both have an x. We pull that out, and then we look at what's left in the parentheses. And in this case, it's an x plus 2. Then we look at what we can pull out of the red. We could pull out a negative 4. So I'm going to put a subtract 4 in front. Negative 4 times what gives me this up here, and that's an x plus 2. You know you're on the right track if both parentheses end up being the same. So we have that. So all I'm going to do is just rewrite this, but I'm going to change the colors a little bit. I didn't do anything else. But now you'll notice what we have here in green is the same before and after the subtraction sign. So I'm going to pull that out. That's like my common factor. When I get rid of this green and get rid of this green, it leaves me with the black, a 7x and a minus 4. So that's what goes in my other parenthesis. So we'll continue on here. We have no greatest common factor. We have three terms, so we'll do the AC factoring. We'll look at A being the 12, what's in front of your squared, C is negative 6. We multiply them together, we get negative 72. So now we need to start listing out what multiplies together to give us negative 72. Well, we could start listing lots of them. But we want to try to focus on the pair of factors that will add together to give us this negative 1 that's in front of x. And in that case, it's what we have down here in orange. So I'm going to start out with my 12x squared, and then I'm going to go with my negative 9 from here with an x by it. Then I'll have to have a positive 8 with an x by it, because the negative 9 and positive 8 gives us this negative 1, and we'll still have to have that negative 6. Take out of the blue our common factor, which is a 3x. Take out of the red our common factor, which is a positive 2, so make sure you put down plus 2 here. You'll notice both sets of parentheses are the same, so we're on the right track. So now both parentheses are the same, are the green. I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to be left with the black in my other parentheses. By the way, this is your answer. If you did want to go ahead and FOIL this out, you could double check to see if you actually would get back to the original. That's how you can check to see if you're right. Over here, once again, we start by looking for that greatest common factor, which in this case is an x. Sometimes after you pull out that greatest common factor, it goes farther yet, and you notice what's left in the parentheses is really differences of squares. So you'll have your common factor in front. Remember, differences of squares. You have two parentheses that are the same, except one is a plus, one is a minus. What goes in the beginning of each parenthesis? You ask yourself, what's being squared to give me an x squared? And so that's an x. So you put an x in the beginning of each one. You ask yourself the same question here. What's being squared to give me 25? And that's a 5. So you put a 5 in the end of each parenthesis. So both parentheses are the same, but one's plus, one's minus. Here, we look for a greatest common factor, but there isn't any. We have two terms, and then you can realize it's really differences of cubes. 8 is a 2 cubed. 125x cubed is really a 5x all cubed. So when you look at your formula back here, you want to identify what A is and what B is. So your A is what's being cubed, which is the 5x. So you're going to replace all your A's with the 5x. Your B is what's being cubed after the subtraction sign, and that's a 2. So you're going to replace all the B's with a 2. First parenthesis we can't do anything with. Now some people won't put 5x here in parentheses squared, and then they'll get the wrong answer. But whatever was being cubed up here goes here, and then that squared applies to the whole thing. So it's really a 25x squared. And then this right here we could just write as a 10x. This right here we could just write as a 4. Over here we have 4 terms. There's no greatest common factor, so we'll just factor by grouping. What can we pull out of the first two? Well, we can just pull out AY. And then we end up being left with this. What can we pull out of the last two? Well, we could go ahead and pull out a 3x, and then we're looking at this. Now you'll notice both parentheses are the same, so just like with the AC factoring, if they're both the same, you're on the right track. So the parentheses that's the same, we put right here. What we have left, which is the AY plus the 3x, goes in front. And that's it. That's our factory.